I am philosophically very much an organic grower. I'm really a firm believer in this idea of pest populations and disease populations and weeds, for that matter, are a part of the world and we never get rid of them. But the last 3 years, Brussels sprout harvest has not been so great because we've really been struggling with that balance. We've had a lot of cabbage aphids.
This is Serious Grower Podcast. I'm Anna. I'm an entomologist. I'm a scientist. I'm using this podcast to talk to all kinds of growers and eaters who are serious about their farms, their gardens, their local food systems, and I'm asking, how can science help? Today's co-host is Seth. He is a commercial farmer in Mid-Coast, Maine, who I was connected with through Caleb Goosen at Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association for a kind of super tech support kind of question. I got him on the phone, so you might hear me annoyingly talking over him here and there when I get excited about something, but I will let him introduce himself and his farm.
We grow a couple of vegetable crops for wholesale, and that's an evolution. We were a big CSA farm and did 50 different crops on 17 acres for several years, too many years. Then shifted over to wholesale 6 or 7 years ago. Carrots and Brussels sprouts are the two big crops. And I went for Brussels sprouts because I'd grown them off and on as part of the CSA and had relative success with them. I wasn't an amazing grower, but I felt like with a little extra time that I'd be able to focus on them, I should be able to dial them in. And first couple of years, we had amazing crops, expanding. We harvest, we grade, and then we put into retail packaging with UPC symbols that's fully branded, and we go to places like Whole Foods or to statewide distributors, that kind of thing. We're trying to have a high quality product that's consistent year to year, and we're kind of looking at that from a lot of different angles. I am philosophically very much an organic grower. Other than a couple of years when I was kind of farm handing around, all I've done is work on organic farms or run organic farms. And so I'm really a firm believer in this idea of pest populations and disease populations and weeds, for that matter, are a part of the world and we never get rid of them, but we're trying to create an environment where everybody can live together and we can get some food out of it in the meantime.
So all was well until cabbage aphid. And there may be a few of you who are experienced Brussels sprouts growers and saw this coming from a mile away, because this is one of those insect pests that it's just really a standout challenge and a very different pest from your run-of-the-mill aphid pest. In my experience, generalist aphids, those species that you'll find in a broad range of crops and plant families, are very rarely pests in northeastern vegetable crops. I mean, you'll find them, but they will never get to a population that causes problems. You're more likely to find that balance of natural enemies and pests that Seth was talking about, especially in the fall when predators and parasitoids, their populations have had all summer to grow and multiply. Even the specialist caterpillars that you find on broccoli, kale, and cabbage, they can be very well managed in a biologically diverse landscape like you'll find on Seth's farm. Well, enter the cabbage aphid, Brevicorn brassicae. It's got a lot of things going for it. It's got its own physical defense and its own chemical defense and a bunch of weird behavioral things that we need to talk about. Some folks around here call them gray aphids because their body is coated with a waxy substance. They actually secrete this themselves. That waxy coating on insects like mealybugs, whiteflies, and these cabbage aphids we're talking about, it serves as a multifunctional defense system for that insect. It likely provides some protection against dehydration of these little tiny insects, and it can interfere with the efficacy of those natural enemies we were talking about. These aphids are also chemically defended. They are specialist feeders on brassica plants, which all produce a chemical called glucosinolates. Actually, there's several chemicals that are in a family of chemicals called glucosinolates. They're the chemicals that make spicy mustards and horseradish so spicy. This is also where we got the idea for mustard gas. So this family of chemicals, they will vary in their level of spiciness. Some plant species have more than others. Some plants have more of the hot and spicy ones, and some have more of the mild ones. No matter what you're talking about, specialist feeders need to develop a tolerance to these chemicals themselves, and some of them sequester those chemicals for their own defense. We're not really sure which of these elements is the most important, has the most outsized impact on the natural enemies that we're talking about, but it probably varies from predator species to predator species. It might make them harder to find if they're covered in a waxy coating, maybe harder to handle. There may be preferences we don't really understand. We will come back to this later. In the case of Brussels sprouts, cabbage aphid is much more likely to cause crop injury that is unacceptable, especially to the market that Seth is describing, because they are more likely to be a crop contaminant. This species of aphid has a stronger feeding preference for fast-growing meristematic tissue, so the growing points on the plant. This results in a greater likelihood of finding these aphid infestations inside Brussels sprouts because each one of those sprouts is one of these growing points. So they're harvested, and then shock horror, you find all these waxy aphids inside your Brussels sprouts. That's no bueno. For any of you commercial vegetable growers who would like more information about pest management for brassica crops in the Northeast, make sure to check out the Brassica Pest Collaborative's work. I am leaving a link to their UMass hosted website, but it's a group of specialists from all over the Northeast. There's even a webinar on cabbage aphid. I'll leave that for you too. That webinar officially starts about 6 minutes into the recording because the organizers left in a very helpful behind the scenes preamble from New York IPM's Dan Gilrain about how to approach chemical management for conventional growers. It features research from other folks in the Brassica Pest Management Collaboration, but is delivered by me with a very bad cold. I almost didn't recognize my own voice. Check it out. Back to my conversation with Seth.
We have, in the last few years, been in a relationship with Xerces Society, and we've gotten some NRCS funding to do a whole lot of permanent and annual beneficial plantings in the fields, around the perimeters, with the idea of just trying to get our overall insect biology to be more diverse, with the idea that that diversity was going to give us some kind of balance. In the last 3 years, our Brussels sprout harvest has not been so great because we've really been struggling with that balance. We've had a lot of cabbage aphids. What I've been trying to do is to plant dedicated beds within the Brussels sprout blocks of sweet alyssum and phacelia. We've been direct seeding those and or transplanting the sweet alyssum when we don't get a good direct seeded stand. We've seen just amazing amounts of hoverflies in the fields. We had a Xerces entomologist on the farm a few years ago, and she's like, I've actually never seen this many hoverflies in one place before.
Did she spin around in a circle in delight?
Yes, there's a lot of walking on tippy toes. Yes, it was exciting for everybody. We like that, but we're not getting the control that we need to actually maintain profitability.
Can I
Yeah,
ask
go ahead.
you another question about that? Because
Totally.
obviously it's doing what the claim was, and it sounds like it's not supporting the species that are good at eating cabbage aphid because they're harder than your average aphid for some of these species of predatory flies.
Yeah.
Separate aside from the pest management side of that, the non-crop plants that you have in there, like what else are you noticing about that as far as crop management? Like, is it neutral as far as it's not competing with your crop? Maybe you're getting
Yep.
some weed control. What are the other benefits or detractors from having that extra planting in there?
It's really beautiful, and it is a little extra time and some cost for seed. We try and set it up in rows, so we're trying to mechanically cultivate it for weed control, but inevitably there's some hand pulling that has to happen in there as well. So there's a little bit of a time investment. And then, if we've got 10 beds in a block and we're taking 2 or 3 of those and putting them into phacelia and sweet alyssum, that means we're anywhere from 20 to 30% of our potential planting ground we're taking out of crop production and we're putting into beneficial production. So economically, it's a commitment for sure. But I think it makes me feel really good to see it, and I enjoy it, and I feel like it is very much the right thing to be doing. I'm just trying to kind of figure out how to how to make it work so that we can get some benefit from it, but that we can actually get a better crop out of it. The evolution continuing, I've been pestering Caleb about this for a couple of years now, about how do we get control or use organically approved controls within our Brussels sprouts that kind of maintain a non-damaging pest level, but at the same time, not kill all these beneficials that we put such effort to bring into the fields. Parallel to this, we got some NRCS funding to improve our irrigation system. And that was hinged on being able to water the same amount of acres, but using less water. We have what's called a reel system, which is basically a gigantic hose that kind of works its way back in. But instead of having a single big gun at the end, we have a boom. And the boom sits right above the crop and delivers kind of a fine mist of water right onto the crop, as opposed to kind of throwing it through the air at great distances.
Oh, because that was my question for you, because I know that Caleb said something about a traveling gun, and I was like, what? Traveling gun?
Yeah, it's a boom irrigation from a traveling gun or a traveling reel. So in putting that together, I was like, I wonder if we could deliver control via the irrigation system. And I quickly found out that you can't irrigate and deliver controls in the same pass, but you can do an irrigation pass and deliver, a half to an inch of water to your crop. And then you could pull the boom right back out, and using a kind of Venturi type mixing valve, you can deliver a proper rate of a control right onto the crop, much faster rate. And so basically, if you're taking a concentrated control and mixing it into your irrigation water, there's a check valve so that the control doesn't go back into your water line. It applies it to the surface of the crop. In theory, we could add droppers that would spray some undersides or lower part of the plant that needed. That was kind of the idea. And then the conversation kept going about, what controls we could use, when we would use them, and where we would maybe place our beneficial plantings so that we'd still get some benefit from them, but they wouldn't be necessarily right in the crop where they would just get slaughtered by the control. The general consensus was we should be thinking about an insecticidal soap like Impede with a backup of kind of a neem-based control like as a rotational control with that.
I'm going to jump in here to fill you in on some of the homework I did after talking to Seth. Start here with this discussion of insecticides, because Seth is interested in a couple of products that are approved for use in organic systems. He will still need to get approval from his certifier to use any of these approaches. That is a big part of being certified organic. Lots of thoughtfulness, lots of paperwork. I also wanted to dive into some issues we've flagged with this application strategy, because that is actually what brought him to me. First, the insecticides. Insecticidal soaps like the Impede that Seth mentioned are just what they sound like. They're soaps. They're not detergents, though. We're talking about old-timey soap. Think more like Dr. Bronner's, less like Dawn. These products are registered for use on crops, and they are formulated and tested to make sure they don't cause phytotoxicity to plants. They kill soft-bodied insect pests like the aphids we're talking about by coating the insect's body in a manner that dissolves the insect's exoskeleton, which leads to the death of that insect. So you can see why these cabbage aphids having an extra layer of wax can make this a little more challenging. But on the other hand, these soaps would have very minimal impact on most of the natural enemies that Seth is hoping to preserve on his farm. Seth also mentioned insect growth regulators, such as products containing azadirachtin, which act to suppress pest populations by delaying or preventing immature insects from maturation to reproductive adults. This is different from neem oil. Some neem oils have azadirachtin in it, but not all of them. So you really need to pay attention to what the ingredients are on those products. They kind of vary in how much impact they would have on natural enemies, because this azadirachtin it's not lethal as a growth regulator. So in theory, they should have negligible impact on any adult species and maybe even negligible impacts on the predatory fly larvae that might already be munching on aphids during that spray. They could be impacted by the physical disturbance of the spray or the skin melting characteristics of the soaps, but should be a negligible impact. According to trials conducted at UNH, insecticidal soaps work okay at suppressing aphid populations as long as you apply them pretty frequently, maybe weekly after you first detect the aphids. Azadirachtin is a little bit more effective, but they are more expensive, and you also need to apply those pretty frequently if you have an infestation. Early detection, sufficient spray coverage, and frequent applications are critical to successful pest management for either of these approaches. This need for frequent application is a barrier for operations that have limited labor or lack appropriate equipment. I know a lot of these organic growers don't even have spray equipment. And that is the case for Seth. This irrigation system looks very attractive to him because of limited labor. But there is one major problem. Impede's pesticide label says explicitly not for use in irrigation systems. So that is off the list for Seth. Using a pesticide in a manner inconsistent with its labeling is a violation of federal law. So even though Impede is on the list of approved products for organic use, and I would bet that his organic certifier would be fine with this plan, Seth cannot use this. However, there are other insecticidal soap products that work exactly the same that are conveniently silent on this matter. Seth can use those. But it is important to understand why this is an issue before we proceed. Well, first off, most irrigation systems, if you think of all the irrigation systems out there, would be completely inappropriate. So if you're thinking about drip tape or bubbler style irrigation systems, they deliver water directly to the soil. So none of that product would get on the plant and they would get nowhere near the insect body. And it is very critical that it gets on the insect body for it to work. But even in this system that delivers water to the whole plant, overhead application might result in uneven coverage, which can be an issue. Soaps need to be delivered at a very specific concentration, something like 1% to 2%, which Seth can achieve with the injector that he talked about. But there might be variations in concentration from one arm of the boom versus another, or maybe even spikes in concentration or variations in concentration across the system that could lead to widespread leaf burn, that phytotoxicity that we're worried about. Phytotoxicity can be exacerbated if pesticides are applied under extreme conditions like high temperatures. I believe Seth is undeterred on this point, but we have advised him to keep an eye on temperatures when he makes his application. And actually, I think the fact that all of these applications will follow an irrigation event will be very helpful there as well. Physical clogging can also be a concern. Irrigation water might have significant mineral content like calcium or magnesium, and these soaps might react to form insoluble soap scum. I think we all know that if you have heavy mineral water in your bathroom. Delivering soap through irrigation systems could clog emitters, filters, small micro tubes, taking a lot of time to clean. It sounds like Seth is fine in this department as well, but you can understand why a pesticide company who is thinking about all of these situations where all of their customers might be deploying their products running into problems, either with that product not working because it wasn't applied to the right part of the plant, or concerns about phytotoxicity and clogging there enough to say, no, nobody gets to use our product in their irrigation system. It kind of makes sense. In terms of environmental hazards, there is a risk of soap siphoning back into the main water supply, which could raise concerns regarding toxicity of aquatic organisms in the ecosystem. This hazard can be avoided with proper backflow prevention in the irrigation system, which is a component of Seth's system, so no problem there. And this is typically a requirement for all NRCS subsidized irrigation systems. They require this in order to avoid any crop amendments like fertilizers from getting into the water supply through back filtering. So all systems are go on that point. Back to my conversation with Seth.
The reason that cabbage aphid is so well defended against predation, it's twofold. It probably has to do with the fact that they are eating a brassica, and it's possible that they're taking up some of that mustard gas themselves for their chemical defense. And also they're covered in this waxy stuff. So I almost wonder If in this case, the pesticide, which is the soapy stuff that's breaking down the wax on the surface of the aphid body, if that maybe would synergize with the predators, right? So if they're having a
Sure.
harder time attacking this aphid, maybe the combination of the insecticide and the biocontrol here, because they interact really well, could that be helping? And I'm thinking
Yeah.
about ways that I might be able to test that before you even get going this fall. Like if
Mm.
we could collect some flies either here in Durham or where you are and do some small trial stuff. I think I can probably get my hands on some cabbage aphid if I do it sooner than later. Cause like I bet you there's some tunnel growers around here who have it if they're
Yeah.
honest with me. So
Yep.
these are some things I was thinking about. Like, can we get any questions as far as caging some predatory animals with their prey items? And is it easier or harder for them to do that? Another question I had for you about the alyssum, maybe you don't have enough experience or weren't really paying attention to it, is that there's like a little philosophy with alyssum that is a good companion planting for Brussels sprouts because it is a brassica. This is not proven with data. This is just something we were kind of thinking this should be investigated. Is that like, would that be something that supports like a brassica loving predator? And a brassica
Mm.
loving predator maybe has this co-evolutionary relationship with the cabbage aphid that might be chemically defended. Do you know what I mean?
Okay. So the benefit of having that around is that you're really kind of making a more permanent environment. And so your population can build year over year.
Yeah, in theory. But partnered with that is I wonder if you've ever noticed any pest insects on the alyssum, like flea beetles or caterpillars that you usually see on Brussels
Mm,
sprouts.
That's a great question. Interesting. I've never felt like we've had a big issue with diamondback or cabbage worm, looper,
Mm.
or in the Brussels. We've had occasionally cutworms in the spring, and we've definitely had flea beetles in the spring. But that's also been before we've had the alyssum either in the field or really established to really notice. I think it's a great, interesting thought.
Again, it's still theoretical.
Here's just a side note in that we got some NRCS money to do these big kind of like, for lack of a better way of saying it, these wildflower plantings that
Mhm.
are like a quarter to a half an acre large in the perimeters. And we ordered them from Ernst Seed down in Pennsylvania. Almost they're entirely natives. We're getting a bloom from as early in the spring until as late as the fall as possible. Xerces bought the first round of it, but I bought the second round of it. And when I bought the second round of it, I had Ernst add alyssum to it. I saw that coming up in the beneficial planting around the edge, but the theory being that that's just going to keep reseeding itself season after season and always be there. I like that plant. I really think it's pretty amazing in relationship to how it grows, tenacity of its blooming. I mean, it just
Mm.
goes and goes and goes. It's almost like it has to have like a super hard freeze before it even dies.
Right? It was it because
Yeah.
it's a brassica. Well, it's a
Yeah.
brassica. It's related.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool.
We were going to take the beneficial plantings and instead of putting them right in the block, move them a few beds to the outside. And so, which works for us because the way we do our rotation is we basically have these 1 acre strips in our fields and the crop moves around. So it's never in the same place every 4 years, but it could actually be in the same field. And so it looks from above like piano keys, these long strips that each one is a different crop. Sometimes they're cover crops, some are cash crops. And generally the either side of one of our cash crops is in a cover crop. And so you could plant it out to whatever cover crop you're going to plant, but then you could also put a strip of beneficials in there as well and still get the benefit of having them out in the middle of the field, but not have to worry about killing them.
Oh, awesome. Are you with those beneficial strips? Is that a blend of legumes in addition to some of these like famously insectary plants, or what else is in there?
It's up for debate, in all honesty. I mean, at this point, it would probably still just be Phacelia and Sweet Alyssum, but
Mhm.
the other cover crops that would be growing there would be a mix of legumes and grasses, sometimes a brassica, depending on the timing.
Like a tillage radish?
I've been looking at
Oh,
camelina, things that we might be able to get. Since we grow carrots, I'm really interested in kind of biofumigation crops, not
mhm.
necessarily in their
Oh yeah,
kind
I
of
know.
use.
I know a thing or two about biofumigation.
I'm sure you.
I used to play around with them a little bit, and they're actually effective enough that you have to worry about plant back.
Yeah, 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 that's right. They're heavy duty. They're really heavy duty. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason they called it mustard gas back in World War One. It's like
Right?
heavy duty stuff.
I'm not fooling around.
Yeah.
It sounds like Seth is moving away from having insectary plantings intercropped with the cash crop he's trying to protect, but he's making some serious investments of space elsewhere on the farm. And this conversation really highlights to me why I love working with farmers, because they think in 4D. It is so cool. So not only three-dimensional space, but also over time, because he's thinking about rotations with non-crop plants, those cover crops he was talking about, as well as his other primary cash crop, which is carrot. And that tends to have more below ground pests of economic concern. That is a conversation for another day. We should get to that. As far as what we know about the distance of an insectary plot from the cash crop and how it influences biocontrol, it sounds like it really depends on what kind of beneficial insects we're talking about. So the very tiny parasitic wasps, the ones that lay their eggs inside aphids, they may have a little more trouble covering a lot of ground because they're so tiny and they're not strong of flyers, but they are very good at finding their hosts. So it's unclear whether or not distance is even an issue. The predatory flies we're talking about, the hoverflies, the adults feed on nectar and pollen, and then they seek out aphid colonies to lay their eggs. And that is so their offspring, those predatory larvae, will have something to eat. This is a maternal choice. Those adults are very strong flyers, so distance is not a problem at all. But they might not want to seek out a spicy cabbage aphid for their offspring. There are preferences demonstrated in the literature. I found a few papers where generalist predators like lady beetles showed a preference for non-spicy aphid species over the spicy cabbage aphids. The hoverfly, Episurfus balteus, shows a maternal preference to avoid leaving her babies with cabbage aphid, which makes sense from an evolutionary perspective because they later found that larvae that were forced to feed on those cabbage aphids, ones that were reared on plants with very high glucosinolate content, they failed to thrive compared to hoverfly larvae that were fed less challenging prey items. So you can see where that maternal choice really makes sense from a co-evolutionary perspective. It makes me wonder if there are any hoverfly species that have a closer co-evolutionary relationship that are maybe lacking at Seth's farm. And if they maybe like nectar and pollen from brassica plants, like the alyssum that we were talking about. I couldn't find much evidence of this in the literature, but it is something that I find really fascinating. And speaking of co-evolutionary relationships with brassicas, I found equally little information in the literature about whether or not these brassica species that we are incorporating into insectary plantings, incorporating into cover crop blends, whether or not they are contributing to pest populations on the farm. I guess no news is good news so far. I think things are looking good. I haven't heard any complaints, but I do wonder, are we accidentally fostering populations of, say, crucifer flea beetles? Or are we in the clear because plants like tillage radish are winter killed and they wouldn't provide overwintering habitat? I don't know, but I would like to find out. Nonetheless, Seth's farm sounds like a real entomological wonderland, and you can tell that I am cooking up a little project, or at the very least, I'm really wanting to come up and visit Seth's farm to make some observations this summer and fall. Maybe provide some help with troubleshooting on this spray stuff, but I am selfishly interested in learning a little bit more about what species of predators are living on the farm, whether or not we are seeing any of these pest organisms living on the brassica non-crop plants that we're talking about. Back to my conversation with Seth.
I was thinking about spray coverage. It's a really good opportunity to test your coverage. The reason I don't think that your idea is so wacky is because we are seeing really good stuff with spray coverage with some of these drones that are coming out. And essentially what you're doing is not that different than what drones are doing when it comes to spray coverage.
We harvest our Brussels sprouts mechanically. To do that, we have a great benefit to lose as many leaves off the stalk as possible. Doing that, we top Brussels sprouts, and we do that anywhere from 30 to 60 days before they're going to be planted. And so that's a time when we try and also plan that. It tends to work out with the early plantings where the aphid is stronger. We'll go through and we'll top, but instead of throwing those tops on the ground, we actually collect. And a vast majority of the aphid population at that time, when it's just getting started, is in the top. And so we always felt like that was a great benefit, was to basically take a significant percentage of the population that's in the field and actually just carry it out of the field.
That would be before the sprouts develop?
Yes. Well, or
Okay.
they are just starting to develop down at the bottom, but we see most of the population up at the top and the young growth at that point, where there
Okay,
aren't sprouts up
yeah.
there.
Another reason that this is the most diabolical, I mean, aphids are diabolical to start out with, but this is the most
Yes.
diabolical, animal out there is that they like the fast growing tissue, right? So
Yeah.
just as like those little sprouts are sprouting, like that's their favorite. So I wonder if that topping happens before they move down to the sprouts.
The most part, that's where we're seeing the population at that time of year. And again, that's that late August time when we're doing that topping.
And that's
So,
probably when you would start targeting your insecticide applications. Oh, awesome. When are you planting?
we're generally planting from like late May or the early part of June, all the way through the end of June. So it's like
Okay.
a 3 or 4 week period. We're doing 4 different varieties.
Yeah, and in the past, when did you start seeing cabbage aphid?
Generally, it's late August, early September.
Here's good news for you. Guaranteed now that we're looking at it, you won't have cabbage aphid.
What?
That's
yes.
that's how research works. Like as soon as
Right,
I get
right.
involved.
Great.
Good,
We just need
good,
to do one of these projects every year.
right. Good news for entomologists is almost always bad news for growers and vice versa.
Yeah. Right.
I'll do some homework and I'll get back to you. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Anna.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, I will leave it there for now, but I promise to report back on what we learn in the future. And this is where I solicit your help. If you are a alyssum enthusiast like Seth, or are passionate about cover cropping and know you have some of these brassica species in your cover crop mixes, can you keep your eyes peeled this year and see if you find any insects on those non-crop plants? I'm thinking about cabbage aphids, maybe that characteristic shot hole feeding caused by flea beetles. Take a photo and send it to me. Reach out if you have any questions about how to identify these plants or these insects. And, follow us on Instagram at Serious Grower to see photos of what we're talking about. I would love to hear from you. Serious Grower Podcast is a production of New Hampshire Community Supported Research. If you are interested in becoming a co-host like Seth, or would like to learn more about our mission to democratize agricultural research, visit our website at nhcsr.org or come over to our YouTube channel at NHCSR, where we're sharing insights from the agricultural research community and vlogging about our research efforts on the farm and maybe on Seth's farm. You can support this work by liking and subscribing. And even better, consider joining our Patreon community.